On the morning of April 6, 1933, millions of Americans woke up as criminals. Not because they'd stolen anything, but simply because they owned gold. The day before, it was their legal right. But on this day, it became a federal crime, punishable by up to 10 years in prison. Overnight, President Roosevelt had transformed gold from a symbol of wealth into an instrument of crime. And so began one of the most massive transfers of wealth in history. A move made by the government against its own people. Today, we're going to explore how. In just 30 days, Americans willingly handed over 3,600 tons of pure gold to the government, and more importantly, why most of them had no idea they were part of a grand deception. The year is 1933. The United States is drowning in the worst economic collapse it has ever seen. The Great Depression has gutted the American dream. Banks are shuttering by the dozen. Families are watching their life savings evaporate. Unemployment lines stretch around city blocks. Hunger is no longer just a word, it's daily reality. Children go to school with empty stomachs. Fathers who once provided comfortable lives now stand in bread lines, heads down, dignity shattered. Mothers stretch every penny, cutting meals into smaller portions. Praying tomorrow will be different. Entire neighborhoods transform into ghost towns as families lose their homes and drift away, searching for work that doesn't exist. In times like these, trust becomes the rarest commodity of all. And when you can't trust banks, politicians, or even your neighbors, you turn to the one thing that has never lied to you: gold. Gold coins tucked under mattresses. Gold bars locked in home safes. Gold certificates stored in drawers. For millions of Americans, this yellow metal was the last anchor in a world spinning out of control. It was security you could hold in your hand, wealth you could hide from collapsing institutions, insurance against total ruin. But President Franklin Delano Roosevelt saw it differently. To him, every ounce of gold in private hands was a roadblock to economic recovery, and he was about to do something no American leader had ever dared: take it all away. To understand what comes next, you need to know how the system worked. Since 1879, the United States had operated on the gold standard. Every dollar bill in circulation was backed by actual gold sitting in a government vault. You couldn't just print money whenever you felt like it. The gold supply set the limit. This created discipline, stability, predictability for decades. This arrangement worked beautifully. Americans trusted their currency because they knew it represented real value. Some people even preferred holding gold coins over paper bills, treating them like we treat cash. Today, a $20 gold piece wasn't just currency. It was a guarantee, a promise made physical. Then 1929 arrived. The stock market didn't just fall, it collapsed. Fortunes built over generations vanished in hours. Millionaires became paupers overnight. And when the dominoes started tumbling, they didn't stop. Banks began failing in waves. Panic spread like wildfire. People rushed to withdraw their deposits, but they didn't want paper, they demanded gold. Real, tangible. Melt dash it dash down dash if dash you dash need dash to gold. They had watched paper promises become worthless. They had seen banks lock their doors with customer savings trapped inside. Gold was the only thing that couldn't lie, couldn't default, couldn't disappear behind a locked door. By early 1933, the Federal Reserve was hemorrhaging precious metal. Every single day, tons of gold were walking out of bank vaults and disappearing into private hands. Citizens converted their remaining dollars into gold as fast as they could. The government's reserves were melting away like snow in summer. If this bleeding continued, the entire gold standard would implode, and with it, the last shred of confidence in the American economy would die. The country would be left with worthless paper and no foundation to rebuild on. Roosevelt understood the equation perfectly. To save the country, he had to sever the link between dollars and gold. But there was one massive problem. You can't break that link while citizens are hoarding all the gold. The solution seemed impossible, unless you were willing to do the unthinkable. So he decided to take it from them. April 5, 1933. Roosevelt has been president for barely a month. The crisis is spiraling. The weight of an entire nation's desperation rests on his shoulders. After lighting another cigarette, He puts his signature on a document that will haunt American history for generations. Executive Order 6102. The official title is bureaucratic and bland, forbidding the hoarding of gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates within the continental United States. But the real meaning is brutally simple. Every American citizen must surrender all their gold to the government within 25 days. All of it, the gold your grandfather panned from California streams, the coins you've been saving for your children's education, the bars you bought as insurance against exactly this kind of disaster. Hand it over. The exceptions were laughably small. You could keep your wedding ring and jewelry for personal use. You could keep gold fillings in your teeth. The government wasn't quite cruel enough to extract those, though they considered it. You could keep rare collectible coins if their numismatic value exceeded the melt value, and industries could hold tiny amounts for legitimate manufacturing operations. Everything else? Surrender it. No discussion. The compensation was non-negotiable, $20.67 per ounce. That was the price, period. No haggling. No consideration for sentimental value or market fluctuations. No acknowledgement that you might have paid more when you bought it. The government set the number, and you would accept it, take it, or face the consequences. Now here's where it gets truly terrifying. The punishment for refusing: a $10,000 fine, 10 years in federal prison, or both. Let's put that in perspective. In 1933, the average American worker earned about $1,600 per year. $10,000 fine meant working for 6 straight years every single day, every single paycheck, just to pay off the penalty. No food, no rent, no life, just debt, and a decade behind bars? That was more time than many convicted murderers were serving, more time than armed robbers, more time than violent criminals. For the crime of keeping your own property, the message was unmistakable: obey or be destroyed. But Roosevelt knew fear alone wouldn't be enough if Americans believed they were victims of theft. They might resist, they might hide their gold, flee the country, or worse, organize and fight back. No, Americans needed to believe that surrendering their gold was noble, patriotic, necessary, the only moral choice. So the propaganda machine roared to life with a sophistication that would make modern marketers jealous. Newspapers across the nation published editorials claiming that gold hoarding was selfish and unpatriotic. Columnists wrote passionate pieces arguing that keeping gold while your neighbors starved was the ultimate betrayal of American values. Editorial boards printed cartoons showing gold hoarders as greedy villains strangling Lady Liberty. Radio stations aired segments explaining how giving up gold would create jobs and restore prosperity. Economists appeared on broadcasts, speaking in authoritative tones about how private gold holdings were choking the economy. Give up your gold, they promised, and factories would reopen. Farms would prosper. America would rise again. Celebrities and community leaders recorded public service announcements urging compliance. Pastors delivered sermons comparing gold surrender to biblical sacrifice. Teachers explained to school children why their parents needed to be patriotic and obey the order. The peer pressure was suffocating. Banks became recruitment centers. Posters plastered their walls with slogans: surrender gold, save America. Your patriotic duty is to help the country in its time of need. Gold hoarders are enemies of recovery. Bank tellers were instructed to treat gold surrenders like heroic acts. They thanked customers for their service to the nation. They shook hands and offered solemn gratitude, as if these people were volunteering for war rather than being robbed at legislative gunpoint. The messaging was clear and relentless. If you kept your gold, you were an enemy of the people, a traitor profiting from national suffering, a parasite bleeding the country dry while your neighbors starved. You were choosing personal wealth over national survival, and it worked brilliantly, devastatingly. Most Americans genuinely believed they were doing the right thing. They stood in those long lines, gold in hand, convinced they were heroes making the ultimate sacrifice for their country. They had no idea they were walking into the most cynical con in modern history. By May 1st, 1933, the deadline had arrived. Lines outside banks stretched for entire city blocks. Families waited for hours in the spring heat, clutching bags and boxes containing their most precious possessions. An elderly woman carries gold, coins her husband gave her on their wedding day, 50 years ago. A middle-aged man brings in the gold bar he purchased with his first big business profit, planning to pass it to his son. A young couple surrenders the coins they've been saving to buy their first home. Each person has a story. Each piece of gold represents dreams, sacrifices, hopes. They walked in holding wealth. They walked out holding paper promises. The results were staggering. In a single month, American citizens voluntarily surrendered nearly 3 million ounces of gold. At 1933 prices, that was roughly $118 million in today's terms, approximately $10 billion, and that's just from individuals, ordinary people who trusted their government and believed in patriotic duty. Add in the gold seized from corporations, banks, and institutions, and the total climbs to an almost incomprehensible figure: 3,673 tons of pure gold extracted from the American economy in 1 month. To understand the sheer magnitude, consider this: many American families own gold that had been in their possession for generations. Between 1848 and 1860, prospectors pulled more than 750,000 pounds of gold from California mountains. During the gold rush, men left everything behind, traveled across a continent, risked disease and death, all chasing that glittering promise. That metal became coins, beautiful $20 pieces called double eagles that families treasured and protected. Starting in 1850, the U.S. Mint transformed California gold into these magnificent coins. Each one contained almost an ounce of pure gold, stamped with Lady Liberty and the American Eagle. These weren't just investments. They were heirlooms, physical links to ancestors who had fought, sweated, and risked everything chasing the American dream. A double eagle represented your great-grandfather's months in freezing mountain streams, your grandfather's back-breaking labor, your father's careful saving, generations of work and sacrifice condensed into metal you could hold. And now the government was demanding they hand it all over, for paper, for promises, for a price the government itself had set. Let me give you some context on what 3,673 tons of gold actually means. That's more than China's entire modern gold reserve, nearly double what Russia currently holds. It's more gold than most nations on Earth possess in their central banks right now. If you melted it into standard bars and stacked them vertically, the tower would be taller than Mount Everest. If you laid those bars end to end, they would stretch for miles. If you tried to move it all at once, you'd need a fleet of armored trucks working round the clock for weeks. At current market prices, that gold would be worth approximately $395 billion. With that kind of money, you could build 26 nuclear power plants, or buy every piece of real estate in San Francisco 3 times over, or fund the entire NASA budget for more than a decade. The scale is almost impossible to comprehend. The government had just pulled off the largest confiscation of private wealth in human history, and most people thanked them for the opportunity to participate. Citizens walked away from bank counters feeling proud, feeling patriotic, feeling like they'd done their part to save America. They had no idea what was coming next. But the real betrayal was still coming. Remember, the government purchased all that gold at $20.67 per ounce. That was the fixed, non-negotiable price American citizens received. The government set that price, enforced it with prison sentences, and refused to budge. On January 30th, 1934, less than 10 months after the confiscation, Roosevelt signed the Gold Reserve Act. And with a stroke of his pen, everything changed overnight. The official price of gold jumped to $35 per ounce. Let that sink in for a moment. The government bought gold for $20.67 in April. By January, they declared it was worth $35. Same gold, same vaults, different rules. Do the math. That's a 69% markup on gold they had just confiscated from their own citizens. Gold they had forced people to surrender under threat of prison. Gold they had purchased at a price they themselves had set. The profit, roughly $2.8 billion in 1933 money. To put that in context, The entire United States federal budget in 1934 was $6 billion, which means that nearly half of all government spending that year was financed by robbing American families. Think about what that means: roads, bridges, government salaries. Military spending, almost half of it paid for with profits from a forced gold sale at artificially suppressed prices. Citizens who had patriotically surrendered their savings watched helplessly as the government made obscene profits while they held rapidly devaluing paper currency. The dollars they received for their gold could buy less and less each month. Meanwhile, the government sat on mountains of gold that had just increased in value by 70%. The con was complete, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. Of course, not everyone went quietly. Some Americans fought back. They hired lawyers. They filed lawsuits. They argued constitutional violations. They demanded justice. The most famous resistor was Frederick Barber Campbell, a wealthy San Francisco businessman. Campbell wasn't just some eccentric millionaire throwing a tantrum. He had a legitimate legal argument. He hired top attorneys and filed a lawsuit arguing that the confiscation violated the Fifth Amendment, the constitutional protection against government seizure of private property without just compensation. His lawyers argued brilliantly. The government had forced citizens to sell gold at an artificially low price, then immediately raised the price for its own benefit. If that wasn't theft, what was? Where was the just compensation the Constitution promised? The case climbed all the way to the Supreme Court. American citizens watched, hoping the highest court in the land would protect their rights, hoping justice would prevail, hoping the Constitution still meant something. And in 1935, in a decision known as Norman v. Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, the court delivered the final blow to those hopes. The justices ruled that Congress had full constitutional authority to regulate the value of money. Gold clauses in private contracts agreements that specifically required payment in gold were declared invalid and unenforceable. In plain English, the government could unilaterally change the rules, rewrite contracts, and citizens had zero recourse. The Constitution, the Supreme Court decided, gave the government the power to do exactly what Roosevelt had done: property rights overridden, contract rights nullified, individual liberty subordinate to government monetary policy. Campbell lost everything, not just his gold, but his faith in the system. The psychological devastation hit him so hard that during one court hearing, he suffered a heart attack and collapsed on the floor. The stress, the betrayal, the helplessness, it literally broke his heart. But worse than his personal tragedy was what his case represented: proof that resistance was futile. The system protected the government, not the people. The courts would side with power, not justice. Fighting back would only destroy you faster. Other Americans tried different tactics. Some hid their gold, burying it in backyards or hiding it in walls. Some smuggled it out of the country, hoping to preserve their wealth in foreign banks. Some simply refused to comply, gambling that the government wouldn't actually enforce the law. They were wrong. The FBI launched aggressive investigations, treating gold hoarders like dangerous criminals. Banks were ordered to report any suspicious activity, large withdrawals, unusual questions about gold, anything that might indicate noncompliance. Neighbors informed on neighbors, sometimes out of patriotic duty, sometimes for reward money. Over the next 3 years, thousands of criminal cases were filed. Federal agents raided homes and businesses. Safe deposit boxes were searched, assets were frozen. In most cases ended the same way: prison sentences or financial ruin. The government made examples of resistors. They wanted everyone to know, comply or be destroyed. There is no third option. Now the government faced a new problem. Where do you store thousands of tons of stolen gold? You can't just leave it sitting in ordinary bank vaults. This was the largest concentration of wealth in American history. It needed a fortress. The solution became one of the most iconic buildings in American history, Fort Knox, Kentucky. Construction began in 1936. The project cost $560,000. Fortune at the time, but no expense was spared. The vault was engineered like a military fortress. Walls over 3 feet thick, made of reinforced concrete. An entrance door weighing 20 tons. A lock so complex that no single person knows the full combination. It's split among multiple officials. Round-the-clock armed guards patrol the facility. Minefields surround the perimeter, yes. Actual landmines. Video surveillance that was science fiction for the 1930s. Motion sensors, infrared cameras. Backup power systems, multiple redundant security layers, even today. Fort Knox remains one of the most secure locations on Earth. It's become a cultural symbol, a metaphor for impenetrability. By 1941, more than 650 million ounces of gold sat inside Fort Knox, over half of all U.S. gold reserves. This was wealth that had belonged to ordinary American families just years earlier. Gold coins grandmothers had hidden in dresser drawers. Gold bars businessmen had bought as insurance. Gold certificates that represented lifetimes of careful saving. Now it was locked behind impenetrable walls, guarded by soldiers, hidden from the very people it had been stolen from. The irony is almost too cruel. Americans had surrendered their gold to save the economy. That gold now sat in a military vault, doing nothing except gathering dust and making the government wealthier. So did it work? Did Roosevelt's gold heist actually save the American economy? The answer depends on who you ask. Most mainstream economists today agree that his monetary policies helped accelerate recovery. By breaking the gold standard, the government gained flexibility. They could expand the money supply, lower interest rates to stimulate borrowing, and fund massive public works programs that put millions back to work. The numbers seem to support this. By the late 1930s, unemployment was falling and GDP was growing. America was slowly climbing out of the abyss. But here's what can't be debated. The policy was built on deception. The government promised Americans they were making a patriotic sacrifice for the common good. In reality, they were funding a massive wealth transfer that made the state exponentially richer while citizens got poorer. The moral cost of that betrayal is still being calculated. An entire generation learned that their government could not be trusted, that constitutional rights were negotiable, that property ownership was an illusion. Those lessons echo through American history. They shape how people view government promises even today. Today, the United States officially holds 8,133 tons of gold in Fort Knox and other federal storage facilities. That's the official number, the government's claim. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Nobody actually knows for sure. The last independent audit of America's gold reserves was conducted in 1974. That's half a century ago. 50 years without verification. 50 years of taking the government's word for it. What's really inside those vaults? How much gold is actually there? Has any been sold off quietly to finance secret programs? Has it been lent out to foreign governments or central banks? Has it been moved, melted, or somehow diminished? We don't know. The government won't let anyone check. And the American people who technically own that gold have no right to verify its existence. The government that once deceived its citizens out of thousands of tons of gold could easily be deceiving them again. After all, they've done it before, and they got away with it completely. Why wouldn't they do it again? The lesson here isn't just about gold. It's about power, about what governments do when they're desperate, about how easily rights can be suspended, property can be confiscated, and promises can be broken. When a government is desperate enough, it will rewrite the rules. Overnight, it will weaponize patriotism, turning love of country into a tool for theft. It will confiscate private property in the name of the greater good, all while profiting enormously from the confiscation. And it will make you believe you had no choice. That resistance is futile. That compliance is virtue. History doesn't repeat itself exactly. The circumstances change. The technology evolves. The specific mechanisms differ. But the patterns, those echo across centuries, and those echoes are getting louder. So the next time someone tells you that this time is different, or that the government would never do something like that again, remember April 6, 1933. Remember the day millions of Americans woke up as criminals for owning gold. And ask yourself, what are you holding today that could be illegal tomorrow? Your cash, your cryptocurrency, your investments, your property rights in moments of crisis. Power doesn't ask permission. It takes what it needs and justifies it later. The precedent was set in 1933. The machinery was tested, the legal framework was established, and the Supreme Court blessed it all. If it happened once, it can happen again. If this story shocked you, make sure you're subscribed. We're just getting started uncovering the truth behind money and power. Hit that like button, and I'll see you in the next one.